Καλημέρα, εγώ έρχομαι από την Μικρά Ασία και λέγομαι Aliki Nicolaides. So I've been involved in the transformative learning community since 2003 when I was a doctoral student here at Teachers College. And actually it was an interesting story. I came here because I was sort of an entrepreneur in Southeast Asia where I was leading women's leadership development programs in the 90s. And sort of bringing my conflict resolution skills alive through communicative action. And I was sort of bumping up against the edges of my own learning, and I was really seeking for where can I kind of grow. I was like noticing I was really needed some more learning, and I applied to a couple of universities in the United States, and I was very curious by this idea of transformative learning. And it just so happened the year I arrived was also a conference. And I remember being at the conference and sort of, I don't know, 250 people walking around, and Jack Mesler was around then, and I remember Bob Keegan was here, and Carlos Torres, I mean, Stephen Brookfield, Patricia Cranton, I mean, Ed Taylor. So it was all sort of these, you know, legacy and lineage holders were here, and I thought, oh my gosh, I have found my tribe. These are my people. So I think that was sort of a real recognition, sort of finding the community where I could see and be seen and be received so that I may grow in order for me to do the work in the world, which for me is, you know, how do I create the educative spaces where deep growth, deep learning, transformation occurs, and connecting the individual and the societal together through transformative learning. And really, I ought to say that in that sense, I'm into transformation. I think transformative learning is one dimension of that. So I would say that I'm not, you know, only a Missourian, even though I kind of grew up out of Teachers College. I look at the phenomenon of transformation, and my own research continues to look at that from a variety of lenses and deep philosophies that really inform the way that I bring, you know, learning and action and inquiry and collaboration together. So this is my third career as an academic. I began my work was really in the grassroots fields of conflict resolution and leadership development in the 90s and the 2000s. And I sort of was, you know, maverick and sort of shooting from the hip and looking for sort of really frameworks, that would help me provide a stronger foundation for people to really inquire and develop the agility, the capacity, the complexity of action, really. Because I'm a Greek-Palestinian woman. I grew up, I'm the first generation to grow up outside of Palestine in 600 years. So I carry sort of the luggage of my lineage and my tribe with me, whether I like it or not. It's one of the identities, and so I'm of the diaspora. And for a long time I thought, oh, my role was to create conditions for the transformation of my parents' home. And I sort of, my 20s and part of my 30s were about that, so my work was that. But then I realized that, well, wait a minute, this idea of transformation is bigger in some ways. And how do I bring it into the moment-by-moment interactions and relational fields that I have access to, you know? And so I began to think about, well, how does every interaction potentially lead to some sort of deeper insight at the individual level, at the group level, at the community level, at an organizational level, social level. I'm much sort of, my heart is in the societal level change. And I realized that I do that by engaging individuals and collectives in order to foster the conditions for their ability to sort of increase the complexity of the ways that they know, the ways that they think, the ways that they, you know, knowing, being, doing, sort of, and particularly the being dimension really fascinates me. So I think I do that now in my classrooms as an academic. And I say that I don't have children of my own, but I have the few students or students who fall in love with sort of my pedagogy and my approach end up going out into the world and doing amazing things. And to me, that connection is precious. So like a good kind of critical thinker, I've always been very suspicious of a very rational, as if the mind is where change happens. And that's not really, the heart of the theory is certainly influenced by communicative action. So already the relational domain in the theory has been always in the background. And I think what I've noticed is that as the theory is evolving and as it's continuing to sort of be built on and exposed, that background relational dimension of the theory is becoming in the foreground. So in a sense, I've noticed how we're starting to recognize that in a sense, the mind or the brain, really, a rational thought might be the first step, to have awareness that there is a need for a change is like just the beginning. And if we're lucky, we create the conditions through relationship to self, inner directedness, relationship with others, interpersonal domain, and systems that allow us to take that beginning seed of transformation and pull it all the way down into the ground, so to speak, into the roots of our being, for it to then become something brand new. So transformation for me is not just a thought or a meta thought or even an awareness. Awareness is just the first step of transformation. And then it's how do we cultivate it so that we truly are not the same in a person, in relationship, in action, in interaction, in impact, right? So this is a much bigger phenomenon than where it's not just permeability and justice. It really is a kind of generative move to something that never was before. So I think I take that approach in transformative learning and really focusing on transformation and whole person, whole system, and the real potential that exists in taking that view over time. And I love this notion of rhythms and certainly we have theorists here who are starting to talk about time and space in new ways, but really there is a kind of rhythm to transformation. And so how do we play with that rhythm in a way of letting it come to be? And how do I as an educator create those conditions to let transformation come to be on those multiple dimensions, myself, each other, society? So when I first met this community, I felt that I had found my people, and being a good, being a tribal woman, coming from the deserts of the Middle East and the beautiful oceans of Greece, and I've had the privilege of living around the world in many places. So in some ways I am a Bedouin and a bit of a nomad, but I'm very loyal. So as a result of that, I've taken up my responsibility as a member of this tribe and said, I'm committed. So I'm also part of a community of volunteers within our larger community that has said, let's continue to form ourselves as an association. So I'm currently sort of the chief steward of the International Transformative Learning Association, and its mission, if you will, its purpose, is really to continue to provide the holding environment, the good enough structure for us to continue to theorize a living theory, to bring that theory into practice, and to continue to build a global community that brings this lens to the problems of the world. So in that sense, I feel like I'm very much committed and want to see the evolution of this community and its theorizing and its praxis, and have put the stake in the ground by taking up leadership in this particular way for now. And as long as I can be of service, I will be of service. I can go to a past Mack truck event, which is an Americanism that I think is quite interesting, and a current event, and I'll say a little bit about both. So I was raised as the firstborn daughter of a very traditional Middle Eastern Christian family, and of course I rebelled quite early, and my father was trying to arrange marriages for me since I was 17 years old, and so I ran away from those opportunities. And I moved, eventually I was in the United States to do one of my degrees. And this young American man followed me for 6 months, and I thought that was love, and so we got married to the chagrin of my parents and my family. And I had this 7-year cycle, and sort of the cliche. And to be honest, it really was a shock. So the disorientation of being a very independent woman and yet still somehow living in tradition, sort of that very naive sense that I can have my cake and eat it too, and not yet mature enough from a complexity of mind standpoint in my 20s to really deal with that. So my now ex-husband had multiple affairs behind my back. I found out in the most public way. It was humiliating. And it really was a moment where I could have been in despair, and I probably could have, if I didn't have the interior resilience and kind of the community around me to make sense and make meaning of that disorientation, I think I wouldn't have survived quite that betrayal. So there was a real personal betrayal in my life very early that really reordered, like that was the, disordering myself, and then taking really 5 years, almost 7 years to reorder my whole constitution, that I was no longer the Aliki that was at that 25-year-old moment. And so that was my lived experience of a move from something that was very ordered, Aliki, self-possessed, all my assumptions, a disordering dilemma that made me question everything. And I was lucky to have maybe the intelligence or the strength of heart or the courageous people around me that really held me in that disorder so that I could reorder myself, which was quite a process for me. So I think and that really drew me then, you have experience, and then, 7 years later, I met the theory, and I thought, oh, this kind of was what happened to me. So I think that's a real sort of from my own experience. And then, now as I'm growing and maturing and sort of evolving my own voice as a woman in the academy, it really feels like a new disorienting moment where I'm taking up voice and responsibility and my own inquiry and being in relationship with my students, with society, with the problems that I care about. It's like really taking what is that next scaling of being in a disordered state at a societal level with people really struggling to understand the current political, economic, social, environmental conditions that challenge us, and how do I meet that in a way that helps myself and those systems really reorder themselves. Well, I'm really super excited about the type of global communities and circles of inquiry that really have formed around the organizing of this conference, and the kind of commitment that people are showing and really taking up their voice, their leadership, their passion in very emergent and beautiful ways. So I love that that's what's happening, and that we're really seeing communities of practice being formed, communities of learning being formed, communities of inquiry sort of emerging out of this community and taking the work out into the world in really unexpected, surprising, and non-predictive and non-directed ways. I find that very exciting.